Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and welcome to yet another edition of Mod Madness. This time around, we are checking out a mod for Half-Life called Half-Life Zombie Edition. Going by the name alone, you should already have some idea of what this mod will allow you to do, but to begin with, this mod sets the scene, putting you in the shoes? Pretty sure they don't wear shoes. Claws! That one works. The claws of a headcrab as it derps around its native homeland of the Zen border world. That is, until a portal storm kicks in, transporting the poor thing unceremoniously into the harsh alien lands of the Black Mesa research facility. But yes, as you can probably tell, this is much more than a simple gameplay mod. This is something that also includes a fully fledged mini-campaign, which is tailored to take advantage of all the things you'll be able to do as a headcrab. Priority, however, is of course finding yourself a fresh head to hump, all in the aim of transforming yourself from a lowly headcrab into a much more formidable headcrab zombie. There's a few advantages to attaining this form, and the chief of which is the fact that you're now a fair bit tougher to kill than you were before. The body that you've essentially hijacked now acts as additional armor, and you can actually improve this by feasting on the bodies of any dead enemies that you come across during the course of your journey. That said, it's not all about killing people and feasting on their flesh, it's also about navigating the hazardous environments of Black Mesa itself. This opening section is a pretty good example. You've got to make your way down this air vent corridor with the fans pushing and pulling you in various directions with your slow, unwieldy frame barely able to make its way past, but what made me chuckle was this section at the end here, which has you hopping down these two broken sections, and the intention is to have you float up on the one at the bottom, but because there is a fair amount of jank involved here in the zombie edition of Half-Life, it doesn't always quite work as intended. Something else you'll be dealing with during your amblings around the Black Mesa facility is having to deal with heavily armed enemies, such as security guards, scientists, and yes, even soldiers. But the key to dealing with this is often either in distraction or circumventing the situation entirely. In this case, there's no real way to get around this without tanking some bullets, but thankfully, because the AI isn't really all that smart, you can in fact just wander up to their faces and claw their eyes out, which then allows you to feast on their guts and replenish your health. But an interesting side effect on feasting on the bodies of your fallen enemies is that you will also acquire upgrade points. If you're wondering where these points are displayed, you can see them in the bottom left of the HUD, just above the headcrab symbol, and depending on what body you're feasting on, I believe the number of points you gain does in fact differ, but once you reach 20 points, you can choose a class. That's right, Zombie Edition features multiple zombie classes, each of which involves their own upgrade tree. Standing between you and those last few precious upgrade points required before you can pick a class, however, are a few hairy situations, such as the Hallway of Death here, where your choices are follow your brethren down the hallway and get thoroughly eviscerated by the auto turret, or get a little sneaky and clamber through the vents above so you can drop down behind the checkpoint. Now you may be thinking you could take out the guards in this situation to get those last few upgrade points, but that's where the mod does a few interesting things to pace out the proceedings, because sure, you could stop to try and kill these guys and feast on them, but all the while, you've got the auto turret, which as soon as it sees you, pretty much fills you full of lead. So now you're probably thinking, if that's the case, then what's the solution here? How are you supposed to get out of this situation alive? Well, believe it or not, another ability that's available to you is the ability to pop your headcrab off the host body at any time of your choosing. And the intent is to pop the head off and shuffle away into another vent before anything has a chance to shoot at you here. But occasionally, things will glitch. Like I said earlier, there's a fair amount of jank, and occasionally the jank will work in your favor. Once you get past that troublesome section, however, you should be free and clear to bag yourself a new host body and get down to the very, very important business of choosing your preferred class. As you glimpsed earlier, 3 in total. You've got the Crasher, you've got the Rusher, and the Breeder. The Crasher is very tanky, very slow, also quite strong. The Rusher is listed as fastest and deadliest, and the Breeder is apparently an incubator for parasites, which means you can hold more headcrabs and eventually issue orders to headcrab zombies, provided you put enough points into the upgrade tree. But for me, because I felt the need for speed, the Rusher seemed to be very much in my wheelhouse. The perks of this one, as you can imagine, are many. The speed is definitely a huge advantage, especially when dealing with the jankiness of the AI here. In some cases, you can completely circumvent an enemy defensive line and pretty much tear their faces off before they've even had a chance to react to you. Or in some cases, they're just so dumbfounded that you've even done that the AI doesn't even react at all. Now, there are other methods that you could use to take out your enemies, but why would you when they're all so much less effective than making a beeline for the faces? The headcrab method here, of course, involves throwing headcrabs at your enemies, which sounds pretty fun on paper, because it'll transform them into allies, but then you realize the throwing mechanic is just as janky as the AI, and rarely works out as you'd imagine. In most cases, when you do land a lucky headcrab position, you'll find that it's not very long before the enemy just murders the crap out of it, which is mildly depressing, but, you know, good job. Good job to the Black Mesa security team there. Not that it'll help them stay alive for much longer, because you can just hop the barricade like I have done here, and even though I've already taken a fair amount of hits, I can bring them down quite easily. That scientist didn't even know what way to aim, just making my job so much easier. But yeah, the alternatives were also crawling through the little vent system here at the bottom, which would have kicked me out in an adjacent corridor where I could have taken over another host body and then snuck around behind these guys. But hey, why do that when you got the path of least resistance right here? If I had to pick a section of Half-Life Zombie Edition that stuck in my mind the most, I'd probably pick this section right here, and that's only because it was so bloody irritating to get through. So the general gist of this area is you get yourself a body which grants you the ability to smash this override panel. Smashing the panel sends all of the turrets in this area haywire, killing all of the enemies and ultimately each other. At least I believe that's the intent. The trouble is the inherent jankiness of this mod means that the situation never seems to play out the same way twice. For example, in this attempt, some of the ceiling turrets are still alive and kicking, and there is no possible way for me to fight back against them, leaving me with no other option than to, I guess, run away and or die. If you've got a little bit of patience, though, you will eventually stumble across a permutation of events that does play out as intended, that actually allows you to proceed, but seriously, I wouldn't blame any of you for dropping this mod during that section. It does get just infuriatingly janky. Even once you're done with the turrets, there's a section beyond that can screw up in a whole myriad number of ways. But regardless, I persevered, I made it through, and I eventually emerged above ground here in the final third of the mod's campaign. As you can see, it primarily pits you against soldiers, and they are a little bit more heavily armored than the Barneys, but at this point you should have a perk with the Rusher that allows you to ignore armor, so dealing with them ends up feeling pretty similar. If anything though, I'd say that the above ground sections are a fair bit less satisfying to play through in comparison to the sections below ground. There's a lot less vent sneaking, there's a lot less intelligent application of your abilities, and it seems to largely boil down to watch other big things spawn in and take care of the issue for you, or at the very least, watch some kind of scripted setup play out before you swoop in and mop up what's left. Don't get me wrong, I like the idea of being able to fight alongside the Zen invasion. It just feels at this point the mod kind of gives up on introducing interesting situations for you to tackle as a headcrab zombie and just says, sod it, we're gonna have gunfire and explosions, and you're just gonna run up to things and hit them in the face till they fall over. It feels more like a regression of the ideas rather than a progression. That said, it almost feels like an inevitable outcome when you consider the upgrade trees, especially for the likes of the Russia class here, which largely prioritizes speed and heavy damage dealing in a short amount of time. It really kind of boxes itself in by the time the mod itself reaches its peak. But as you can imagine, this is a mod that's designed to be played multiple times, what with all of the choice in the class types here. So for my second playthrough, I decided to pick Breeder, and I immediately regretted my decision. Not just from picking the Breeder, but from picking Russia for my first playthrough, because going from that to this is a bit of a harsh transition. You no longer have the speed. You no longer have the additional deadliness that you can unlock. You instead have the ability to order zombies around, but there's not really all that many zombies around to begin with, and if you do want to make more zombies, you're going to have to find some headcrabs, which, you know, are dotted around the place and often don't really do that great of a job of attaching themselves to the skulls of things you throw them at. So you end up doing this, sneaking up and hitting them in the ass until they fall over, because the AI, thankfully, still remains dumb as shit. In all honesty, though, this is a class that could do with a hell of a lot of improvement right from the word go. I mean, as a breeder class, I was expecting it to be able to automatically generate headcrabs. Then you'd have an interesting trade-off. Do you convert your enemies into allies, or do you consume their bodies for points? Do you go with ability or sheer force of numbers? That would have been interesting, but that doesn't really seem to have been realized at all. Instead, you've got the choice of doing the exact same thing but slower, and also maybe throwing barnacles at your enemies. Now that sounds cool on paper, and it did sound cool to me at the time, which is why I picked it on the upgrade tree, but as it turns out, you do not in fact get to wield a barnacle, which is what I was hoping would be the case. Instead, you crack the barnacles open, you get some pile of snot from inside them, and you can throw them at your enemies. So the gimmick here is that you have a ranged option when it comes to this particular headcrab zombie type, and oh the excitement. Oh, the excitement I felt at that very moment when I realized that's what I was able to do. Yeah, I could just see the path laid out before me, all that jank, the same jank that I experienced last time, but now with the ability to throw poisonous snot at my enemies. Good grief. Suffice to say, I didn't really last all that long playing as the breeder class before I felt the distinct urge to go and do something different, so I thought, hey, why not check out the other class, the Crasher class? And as you can see, this is quite clearly a radically different experience from that of the breeder. I mean, the sheer sensation of speed I'm dealing with here, it's enough to make my eyes water even now, but in all seriousness, there is one improvement to this particular class. You can unlock an ability called Acid Throw, and that means that rather than having to hunt down a barnacle like you have to with the other class, you can just instantly start chucking acid at your enemies. So that is already much more immediate than anything the breeder has to offer. But in terms of the tankier aspects of this particular class, you can increase the health of your headcrab portion, which is a good idea if enemies are smart enough to target it. You can also increase the rate that you acquire points in your armor from eating bodies, and you can unlock a shield option, which will quite literally cause your body to shield the headcrab portion with its claws. So, yeah, I wouldn't recommend playing the Crasher class. I certainly wouldn't recommend playing the Breeder class either. I dare say that this mod may have been a better experience if this mod as a whole had instead chose to focus entirely on what you can do as a rusher and the upgrade abilities therein. Truth is, what we have here is a mod that feels like it was trying to be just a tad too ambitious for its own good. There's definitely some cool ideas in here, but as we've since discovered, it's one thing to have a good idea, it's entirely something else to make that idea workable and, you know, actually fun to play. So there you have it. For best possible results, pick the Rusher class, pretend like the others don't exist, and cross your fingers that your particular playthrough proves to be lighter on the jankiness than mine was. You want to know just how janky my playthrough got? It was so janky that the mod wouldn't actually let me complete the campaign. Seriously. I managed to do it once. And that was the very first time I ever tried the mod. Ever since then, the mod thought it'd be a great idea to just teleport me into a wall instead. So yeah, here's hoping that you don't have to suffer that particular injustice. But anyway, if you're feeling brave and you'd like to give this a go for yourself, you'll find the link to Half-Life Zombie Edition, as usual, in the description below. While I'm at it, I'd like to give a great big thank you to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon. Thank you so very much for supporting the channel and for helping to make content like this possible. If you're interested in lending a hand yourself, maybe you'd like to see your name in the credits, or maybe you'd like to get early access to new editions of Mod Madness or Doom Mod Madness. In that case, all you need to do is follow the link to my Patreon in the description below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments, and feel free to suggest any mods for any game that you'd love to see me cover in future editions of Mod Madness. This has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.